It's like London's Kew Gardens, but without the need for the massive greenhouse above our heads. Good morning and welcome to the Isles of Scilly. This morning has been very much back and forth. We originally planned to go across to Tresco. We then caught sight of a very large cruise ship that is marinaed here, and we figured a lot of people would like to go to the Tresco Gardens off of that cruise ship, so we changed our mind. We decided we were going to do St Mary's, popped into the tourist information site to go and pick up a map, but they told us that there's another cruise ship coming in on Thursday, which is really the only other day that we can do Tresco Gardens to be able to fit in the things that we want to do, where it's like a one-day event. And there's another cruise ship coming in on Thursday. That one's in all day, whereas today the cruise ship, I believe, is sailing away at lunchtime. So we've like really quickly ran on down to the quay, picked up a couple of boat tickets to go across, and I'm currently sat on the Meridian boat. And it's a bit of a chilly morning because I wasn't expecting to ride a boat. I don't have all of the layers that I normally would have packed, so we've just come on the inside bit in the hope that we can escape some of the breeze that's going to come at us off of the boat. Thank you very much.
We're here. We've been told to watch out for the red flashing lights by the heliport. If they flash red, duck.
Tresco, unlike all of the other islands, is still a privately owned island, so it just means that everything on here, from the businesses to the gorgeous gardens to the holiday homes, aren't just managed by like anyone and everyone the way in which, say, it is on St Mary's. It's all underneath the same management. It does also mean that it's got, I guess, like a much more manicured feel to it, and it does almost feel like a private golf course or something along those lines. Holy moly, we've not even come into the paid for section of the gardens. This is just what is here on the island that you can just wander around, and it feels like these are formal gardens that you would have to pay to go inside of. I mean, just look at everything. There's like a castle up there, it's formally planted areas, gorgeous tarmacked footpaths. We've been on this island and we've only walked like a few meters, but I'm absolutely loving it. Oh, this place is really quickly contrasting. I was saying how neat and manicured it seemed to be, and then it looked like formal gardens with a castle, but then it's just gone and opened out into this like wild scribbland, almost like right on the edge of sort of the beaches, and you've got things like the ferns, and oh, it's just one thing after the next after the next. It's keeping me on my toes. Much like yesterday, we just went straight through the island on foot in the direction of Old Grimsby, and we've come along to the Ruin Beach, and there's a cafe right here on the side of the beach, and it's in amongst the ruins with gorgeous succulents and other flowers growing in it too. And we've managed to nab an outdoor table, and I've decided to go with, they said that it's a sharing platter, which is fine as a starter for two, or otherwise you can just go for it as a main for one person. So I'm having this for myself because Andy wanted to go with the catch of the day, which was the grey mullet served with veggie greens and new potatoes. For me, I have some langoustines, smoked salmon, sea trout, dressed crab, which is nice that I'm not having to faff around with that. And there was pate, and I want to say that that was a mackerel pate. And we've got some little fish over here with the silver skin still on it, and I cannot for the life of me remember what that one was. And then there's some mayonnaise, some sourdough bread, some salad, and then some butter and lemon as well to dress it all in, but obviously this is all cold. Around the edge of this cafe is these gorgeous, gorgeous homes, but my understanding is that they're all holiday homes that can be rented, and they're in amongst some beautifully maintained gardens. And I've seen a lot of the tourists out on bikes, and I think if you're staying on the island during the peak school holidays, it means that you're able to rent a bike. But because we're not staying on this island and it's the peak school holidays, we can't just rent a bike. We've cut across the island from Old Grimsby across to New Grimsby. We will have to come back here to catch the ferry, but the idea is we're now headed towards the very famous gardens. One of the things I do know about this is that the area of water is actually parting between Tresco that we're stood on at the moment and Bry that you can see over on the other side. And it's supposed to be one of the safest anchorages for the yachts because of the high sides of the land on either side. It means that they're not very susceptible to swaying and moving in the wind. It does mean that in the really popular summer months, apparently this area is absolutely packed. I had wondered, with it being May half term, that it might have also been quite packed, but we've come along and it's a bit disappointingly quiet. And I have heard that if it's a particularly large yacht, when it's super busy here, it can also be quite difficult to get those guys in and out of the area. The other really cool thing about this is that at 2 points during the year, the tide drops so low that you can actually walk between the two islands, and the Isles of Scilly even put on what's known as a low tide event where they have like pop-up food stores and live music going on. It's a bit unfortunate that we've not been able to time our trip with that because it sounds like it's right up my street. On either side of that time, it is also possible just to wade across to the other island, but I think with the tide coming in at the moment, it's quite a bit of time after that event. I don't think it's quite possible right now. Just walking down this pathway here, taking in all of the rhododendrons and how beautiful all of the much more mature trees are in comparison to other parts of the island and other islands that we've been to. And then we spotted a golden pheasant. Now, I did know that these exist on this island. I just assumed that they were in the formal gardens that you have to pay for. So just coming down on this public part of it was such a surprise. I've never seen one in real life before, and it's awesome. It looks a little bit like a parrot just because of how multicolored it is, but obviously it looks then like a pheasant in its shape, and this particular pheasant really wasn't very fazed by it. I think the only thing that it was doing was just like hopping out of the way when a bike came past, I think because they just go a little bit faster. But I suppose it's a little bit of a shame about how used to humans they are. I suppose a little bit like all of those little birds that have been buzzing around us during lunch times, but at the same time we made sure that we didn't get too close and that we were using zoom on our cameras. Was it a he? Surely if it's brightly coloured it must be a he, so that it attracts the female. So he was quite happy just to pose for us. So hopefully we'll get to see some more in the gardens, but this has been an absolute treat. We've come back along to Tresco's Abbey Gardens because this morning when we turned up, it really did feel like the entire cruise ship were all here, including the 2 boats that had come across from St Mary's. And when we asked the guy, when do you expect that you're going to be more quiet, in the morning or the afternoon? He said, definitely in the afternoon. He said, if you come back at 12:30, we'll have definitely quietened down. And my guess is that's exactly the time at which the cruise ship passengers needed to head back. No sooner have we stepped into the gardens, we've come across a couple of red squirrels, and if you've been watching these vlogs for a little while, you might have noticed that there's been lots of different places that we've gone to. There was the Anglesey day trip that we did where we went out to one part where you're supposed to be able to see red squirrels and we had no luck. There was the walk in the Lake District and we were like, oh, maybe we might be able to see some red squirrels, and again we had no luck. And I think one time in the Lake District we saw one right from afar, you could barely make it out, but here it's just been amazing. And we've probably been stuck here for about 15 or so minutes. I have found it much easier on video to be able to catch the squirrels jumping from the tree across to the bird feeder. I appreciate for Andy it's a lot more tricky to be able to get that in a single snap on the camera, so I think he is just trying at the moment to be able to get that action shot.
1 minute they're on the trunk, and then the next minute they're on the feeder. So it's really a lot of luck between getting them in the middle of jumping, or it's kind of either side of them.
The island of Tresco has got a very long and detailed history, which I won't go into all of it, but what I do understand is that there was a point in time when monks chose to live here in quite a solitary lifestyle, which is quite interesting because then much later on in the future, people still wanted to live quite a solitary life out here, but instead they acted as lighthouse keepers. But one of the problems was that the churches and the monasteries and the abbeys were of particular interest to pirates, since they found themselves often getting raided. In fairness to them, they did fight back, and there was apparently one particular ship where they were able to kill more than 100 of the people on board, and obviously were able to then keep all of the things that were worthwhile. But it got to a point where the monks just decided it's not worth it, and they moved on. So this particular Abbey Gardens is actually in the space of what once was a monk's abbey. And when Augustus Smith took over the lease from the Duchy of Cornwall back in the 1830s, he decided to plant tropical plants in this area. Now, back in those days, you had a lot of boats that were coming up from more southerly parts of places such as South Africa, the Canary Islands, and as those boats were coming through, Augustus Smith was like, hey, I quite like the look of these tropical plants, I would like to purchase them, and then planted them in this area. Because Tresco Island is very sheltered, you've got St Martin's on one side, Briar on another, and then some of the uninhabited islands, it means it wasn't quite as susceptible to some of the harsher weathers. The fact that we're right on the very southwestern point of the UK as well, it's also been able to benefit from the Atlantic current that brings the really warm airs up from the Caribbean. Because of how far south we are, it also means that we don't have that much in the way of frost. And the only really biggest problem was in the wintertime, the gales that would bring in really, really cold and very salty sea air. So the way in which you got around that was to build a huge row of trees and bushes that would help keep the tropical plants a lot more sheltered, and therefore it's been able to thrive into this really amazing space. The story doesn't really feel too different to the story behind Glendurgan Gardens, which is one that we went to back last summer on the mainland of Cornwall. I think the only real difference was that instead of it being passing ships that came through, the owner of those gardens kind of had his fingers a little bit in the shipping trade, and therefore he was able to say to people like, you go get me this plant and bring it back. But it just seems like it was a very fashionable on-trend thing back in those 1800s. Augustus Smith put together the Valhalla Museum, where he went around collecting the figureheads off of the fronts of the ships that had met their fate as they crashed into the rocks. Apparently the trend of putting figureheads on the front of ships has been around for about 3,000 or so years, and they were seen as being almost like a talisman, like eyes to the sea, to be able to keep everyone on board safe, although obviously, according to all of the ones around here, it didn't always work. Modern day ships and the way in which they're designed these days unfortunately means that this trend can no longer keep on going, but it's quite wonderful looking around at the artistic elements of it. They've obviously been repainted because of how colourful they are, but it's also a little bit eerie at the same time to know that these were all on the front of ships that met a very unfortunate fate, and you do wonder just how many people are likely to have survived off of those shipwrecks. We were saying it to ourselves yesterday when we were on that gorgeous white sand beach with turquoise waters on St Martin's, saying if this was on the mainland it would be absolutely heaving on a gorgeously sunny day like today, and I feel like these gardens are exactly the same. If we had gardens that are so unique as these and as gorgeous and bursting in colour at sort of, I guess, like a prime time of the year. If this was on the mainland, it would be heaving. We're now on the hunt for some ginger. When we first entered this place, because of how quiet it was, I asked the lady on the front desk, what are the must-see things that you think we should go to first? And she said if you head to where there's like a Union Jack planting area, and she said you're going to have a really, really careful eye and keep a close lookout. You might be able to come across some ginger. So in my head, I'm thinking it'll be a little bit like ginger that you would pick up in the supermarket, but obviously still growing from its root within the ground. And I think what is behind us is that Union Jack bedding. So we think we're in the right area, but we're struggling a little bit to find it. We gave up on trying to find the ginger. We felt like we were just spending a little bit too long on it, and we've kept on wandering around the gardens, and interestingly we've managed to come across a few more squirrels that haven't been gathered around the squirrel feeders. The one thing that I had heard that you'd be able to find in these gardens, which we saw outside of them, being that pheasant, we've not actually seen any in here yet. We were tipped off that the best place to see it is on the open lawns, and we've not got to those quite yet. We've had to wrap up our time in the gardens because it does close at 4 o'clock, and in fairness we need to get back to New Grimsby by 4:45 in order to catch the ferry back to St Mary's. It is of course the last one, so once again if we miss that, it does mean that we're going to have to wild camp on here tonight. Not to be outdone by the other islands, it does look like this island has also, in addition to everything that I've showed you so far today, have the gorgeous white sand beaches with the turquoise waters too. We've overshot the quay real briefly, and we've come along to what we think is Braiden Rock. If we're in the right place, these are some steps that during the Second World War, secret agents took to board onto Bretton fishing boats so that they could then infiltrate within France without being known. We've managed to make it to the quay with just 3 minutes to spare until the boat. Talk about cutting it fine, but at least we are a little bit more on time than those guys yesterday.
Leggy, run!